That means I have to hit got it there.
All right, awesome. Well, I can't see everybody's faces, but depending on the amount of questions that that we get in the participation, I might just call on you and just ask if you have any questions or any thoughts. This is a very casual session, so typically how it works is I just ask the individuals who put together the video to give a little bit of a background, just remind us a little bit of the things that they get up to on their woodland, just in case it's been a month or more in this case since we've seen the video. And then I give, we have an hour for question and answer, so it's very casual. We end up talking about a whole range of things that we wouldn't have even thought of. So that's what's really great about this. So I don't know if you've seen, but there are hundreds of views on your video, Rod.
Yes, great, please. I'm sure it's because can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, I just unplugged I just had to switch my headphones, but yes, there are hundreds of views. So it's definitely a very, very important program that we're running now, and we've got a lot of positive feedback from members, hundreds of emails saying how much people have appreciated these sessions, and the recorded versions are also being watched. So even if people aren't here, it's still providing a lot of value. So why don't we just get started? And Rod, if you could just remind us where you are today and where your farm is and where your woodlot is, and just some of the things that you get up to. And while you're talking, the rest of us can just think about a few questions we might have, and
Okay.
yeah, and I might ask a few people if there are some topics that are of interest to them to spur some questions.
First and foremost, I'd like to plug a book. Suzanne Simard is a prof at UBC, and my daughter-in-law gave me this for Christmas, entitled Finding the Mother Tree. And basically, she did research on how fungi connect different species of tree. And that sounds pretty dry, but not when I apply it to my own woodlot. The first and foremost, most of her research was on finding links between birch and aspen and the fir trees that have been planted. And it turns out they share through the fungi, like acronyms, I don't remember them. Through the fungi, they share nutrients back and forth. And the aspen that I've been religiously cutting out of my stand of spruce, and thinking maybe I should let them grow there, and the birch needs some company. Now, is my volume level correct here?
Yes, it's perfect.
I'm just hearing an empty space, so it's hard to figure.
No, it's great.
Anyway, so this book has been quite an eye opener. I when I first wrote to my daughter-in-law about it, I tended to ridicule the book, but then I realized that the content of it is really significant and useful. Most of the research was done in about 2002, and it has now become pretty much the norm. Like when I read this December's magazine, a whole bunch of the ideas in this book were in John Bull's article, for example, and the one just following that. This is a lady who dreamed all of this up. So it's really quite interesting. Okay, enough about a book plug. We live just south of Portland, which is halfway between Kingston and Ottawa. on the just Bob Ray's cottage is 2.75 miles from our farm. He's on the big Rideau, so we're fairly close to the Rideau system. If you put the drone up really far, you can see. Anyway, we've been here since 1966, and my parents farmed, and then they retired from farming and stayed on the property. And my mother is still living. She's 95 and in a nursing home. My dad passed on in 2002. So gradually, we took over the property because we liked the scenery and we thought it would be a good place to retire. My wife and I were living in Smith Falls, 25 miles away at the time of our retirement, or my retirement. Anyway, the what do they call them? The World Plowing Match.
Yeah, the international.
International Plowing Match.
Yeah.
The International Plowing Match. The people came around for that, including the current Minister of Housing for Ontario, Steve Clark. He showed up with a couple of his buddies and asked us to participate in this plowing match. This was in 2005. They wanted our wood lot for the part of it, and the Chant farm on the other side of the property would take care of the rest. Well, we went along with that. I thought it would be interesting, and so of course, I retired in 2004, and so it gave me something to do. I knew very little about anything at that time, and the local stewardship council came along and helped me greatly in learning how to run the place. For example, they got the management plan finished. Stuart, somebody did it. We fought up. We argued and argued and argued, and eventually came up with what I thought was really quite an excellent management plan.
That's a like a MIFTIP plan?
Who? Is that an acronym?
Yeah, the Managed Forest Tax Incentive Plan.
Yes.
Was it one of those?
It's one of those.
Okay.
And it has stood the test of time. He insisted upon a connection between our 25-acre woodlot, a sugar bush, at one end of the property, and the other forest growing on the drumlin, which runs down towards Portland or to the east. Well, he wanted a link, but he wanted to put it right across the middle of a field, and I wasn't having any of that. And so the link went around the line fence to the north and to the east, and that's what we ended up with, which makes a wonderful place to take hikes in the winter because it provides cover. Feel free to break in with questions. I can be kind of boring on this.
Well, you also spend a considerable amount of time learning and understanding your wildlife. Tell us about that.
Well, it has become a family joke, and I have received for Christmas a mug which says squirrels are my spirit animal. Yes.
That's
I
awesome.
told you. I didn't start off talking about squirrels. I talked about a book. Anyway, yes, the squirrels are charming little fellows. And I decided that after the trees were cut, my son didn't cut most of my squirrel references from the video because it was too hokey. But I spent a couple of weeks taking tails of walnuts around and depositing them in places where I was pretty sure that gray squirrels would find them. Now I discovered that if you put a pail of walnuts out, if they disappear over, it was a chipmunk, and they're all gone. And a red squirrel is not much better. I put a wildlife cameras out as well. And if you put a pail of walnuts out, gray squirrel will start an hour before dawn and work well into the dark until they're all up in some maple tree in the bole of the tree, and they will not get planted. Now, grays are a lot different. First of all, I spent a lot of time and a lot of burned a lot of electronic trees filming these squirrels, and a gray squirrel won't touch the nuts for the first day. Then the second day, they'll start making tentative ventures by the nuts, and eventually they'll grab a couple and run up a tree and hide. But the following day, I kept watching them with the camera, turned it around. The following day, they started coming down out of the tree with the nuts already hulled, and then they took them off down the paths about 500 feet away and planted them. And they seem to have a compulsion to scatter hoard. Now, once I knew that, it became really entertaining watching them because gray squirrels overthink things to ridiculous lengths. I watched my favorite one is an actual gray colored gray squirrel. The term gray is capital Grey, and it refers to a scientist who discovered the thing, a British scientist. Anyway, and most of them are black around here. She will plant and dig up and move nuts several times in a day. And then before she gets on to another one. Anyway, if you put out a cache of nuts for gray squirrels, and about a dozen nuts disappear per day for a couple of days, that's probably grays, and there's a pretty good chance that those nuts will grow into trees. And that's what I have found from 2 weeks of work.
So they're your friends. And then so if you're trying to plant a black walnut orchard, how do you get the gray squirrels to take them as opposed to the red squirrels or the chipmunks?
So that's the whole point is you observe. And if the nuts go away right away, no, you are not a great success. Those nuts. It's only if they sit around for a day or two and nothing takes them, and then about a dozen disappear a day, that you're onto a gray squirrel.
Cool.
Now, you can always gather the nuts from the caches of red squirrels. Just move in and steal them. But red squirrels defend their caches so viciously that the grays will stay away from them.
And the red squirrels just eat them?
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
I read a PhD thesis on this done at UBC. Some guy from Nigeria did it, actually. He said that gray squirrels have phenomenal memory and great spatial understanding, but red squirrels are so dumb they don't remember. And so the only way that they can remember where they put a nut is by tripping over it.
Oh my gosh.
And that's why they're under fence rows and in piles and in hollow trees.
Huh.
So, but the gray squirrels are quite another matter. They are really smart.
Wow, that's fascinating. So what was your original inspiration behind planting the field of black walnuts? Like, was some of it to have a a crop for your family or something in the future because the timber's so valuable, or was it some other?
Well, I'm a woodworker,
Okay.
and I've done a fair amount, like several pieces in this room, done with butternut. But the big problem with butternut is it's miserable stuff to sand. And then I got the occasional piece of black walnut, and it's awesome. So I figured if I can grow black walnut and make it into stuff, I'm way ahead. There were, I cut one of the 3 black walnuts that were on the fence row because it had this, hands waving. It had an area which looked, it was smooth wood, faded gray. It looked as though there was some serious blemish, and from everything that I knew about trees, I thought the tree was going hollow. So we cut it. It was 31 inches at the butt, and I got a 12-foot log out of it as the first part of it. This included some of this gray wood, which I thought would be the hollow log. In fact, I got from that section of it clear 17-inch boards, which were already dry. And they made a beautiful silver chest, single boards. And I put a transom in my boat with them. The nicest wood I've ever worked with.
So the blemish had no impact on the wood on the inside.
It was just that the wood, no, the tree was solid. But that part of the tree was dry. Now, this is what really threw Martin straight, the forester who was one of my mentors and who marked the woodlot for a couple of cuts. He has a blind spot when it comes to black walnuts because he was convinced that a tree like that is of no value because of that blemish on the outside. And the other thing is, some of them have splits in them. And he figured that they can't be any good. Well, we cut one. And the one that we cut had a prominent, it was again 28 inches at the butt. It had a split in the bottom 10 feet of the log. He sawed that log up. The sawyer had no difficulty cutting around that split. Now, it wouldn't have made a veneer log in any sense, but it made a fine, produced some fine lumber, and we got 1,000 feet of lumber out of that log.
Wow. Is anybody else here growing black walnut, or does anybody else have a substantial amount of black walnut at their property? No.
How about beech?
This is Andy Hackett. I used to have a farm north of Guelph, and the black walnuts grew like wildflowers there. It was whatever the soil. But I did try to plant walnuts and had absolutely no luck. However, just like Rod, when I left it up to the squirrels to do the planting, they did a superb job, not necessarily where I wanted the trees,
Exactly.
but I still got quite a few from there. So,
well,
I just also, while I'm on, I'll shut up. I just wanted to say something to Erica. I've just been reading the December Outlander, and I'm not sure if it's you that's responsible or whoever in the team, but I wanted to compliment you on it. I've been a member for quite a number of years, and I've always enjoyed the magazine, but it seems to have evolved to a new plane, and I just think it's this latest edition was just terrific. So thank you very much.
Yeah, it's a big team effort, and we've put a we've put a lot of focus on it, and we have a whole team, a whole committee dedicated to it. We meet monthly, and yeah, there's a lot of folks that are involved in that, and so it's exciting, and that's really good to hear that positive feedback. John, who's I'm not sure if you know John, but John Pinot is here, and so is Paul. So John is our executive director and Paul's our president, and both of them are involved in the production of the magazine. And John does considerable work on putting all the articles together and editing them, and so he's the editor, and I put together the design and the layout and all of that. So it's a real team effort.
Eric has given it an incredible facelift and made it look like a really modern and magazine, which it's becoming. So kudos to Erica for that great facelift.
Thanks, Andy.
That's what I was trying to get at. I agree.
Yes, it's. I was just reading, the last couple of issues have been remarkable.
Well, I don't know if you've seen, but we have a section now on different artisans, and we're building our Woodland store, and we have quite a number of very interesting pieces of artwork that are coming from our members' forests. And Rod, I'd love to see some of your pieces in there, because by the sounds of it, we could use some black walnut. I don't think anyone sold any black walnut anything on there yet. So,
well, my current task is building from some of the cherry that came out of the woodlot this winter, and building an English garden bench. It turned out I nicknamed it the Forever Bench. And it's not because of the durability of the cherry, it's because of the length of time it takes to cut all the mortises. Unbelievable. Anyway.
So maybe that's why it's we don't have much black walnut on the store, because it takes forever to make anything with it. Is that what I'm hearing?
No, walnut is nice to work with.
Okay.
But it's just that the plan came from the Yankee workshop, and the guy Norm Abrams, I have trouble with names. He went to England and sat down on a bench and measured it, and came back and made a plan. And it's, to my mind, the best of them, but it's really difficult to make. I used 3-inch cherry planks to make the two ends, and then I had to do a whole bunch of mortises on angles, which were really tricky. But that we're talking about trees here, so I'll leave that alone.
Well, is anybody else woodworking here, and maybe just getting started? And because I'm sure Rod could speak to that. And if not, is anybody interested in butternut? Because that's a whole another topic that I know Rod has experience with.
Can I ask another question?
Yeah, sure.
The soil, what type of soil is there? There's a mention of a drumlin, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the soil around the walnuts.
Yes, that's interesting. The best stand of walnuts in the woodlot were halfway down the drumlin. Now, what's interesting, when I was planting, I planted a 5-acre plot right next to the best walnuts growing in the woodlot, and it ran down a hill for maybe 50 feet of over 660 feet. It was about 50 feet down. The top of it was glacial till, quite gravelly and quite dry. Halfway down the hill, it was a sediment, a silt that I could barely push a walnut into. And then down towards the bottom of the hill, it was clay. Now, of those three types of soil, 100 feet away in the woodlot, the best of the walnuts grew in the silt. Out in the field where I planted them, the best of them grew in the clay. But again, it's on a hill with a southern exposure. And so there was a certain amount of water movement even through above the clay. The worst growing conditions were on that dry glacial till at the top of the hill.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah, black walnut really tends to like wet, cold areas. Is that
That
accurate?
it doesn't like wet feet.
Okay, I thought it did.
No, positively not. But as
Okay.
long as the water's moving, it's okay. For example, in Cataraqui Cemetery in Kingston, right near John A. McDonald's grave, there are some magnificent black walnut trees. And some of them are actually growing in a stream, but the water moves quickly. And these are along the edge of the stream with the roots right down into it. And they're great big trees. But anyway, they don't like wet feet.
Does anyone else have any other questions for Rod? It could be, we could totally change the topic. So we could start talking about nutcrackers if you'd like.
Oh, my neighbor has a collection of walnut crackers, none of which is as good as my Duke, but he has a whole bunch of them produced during the Victorian era using all sorts of mechanisms. None of them are as good as my Duke.
Felix is signing on, right?
This is Andy Hackett. Oh, sorry, it's Andy Hackett again, Rod.
Hi, Andy.
I have a friend who has also, I'm now in the Haliburton Highlands, but he also has a farm still north of Guelph. And he had an open field and he alternated his walnuts with spruce and or pine in rows. And the idea was that the coniferous trees grew faster and forced the walnuts to go up straighter and have straighter grain. Do you have any comments about that and what's your experience?
Yes, another excellent question. I heard the same line that if you put the pines along beside the walnuts will grow up. Well, they won't. But if you plant the walnut seeds between the pines when they're well established, they will in fact grow straight and tall, trying to fight their way up through the pines. I discovered, after I made the film, I discovered maybe 8 or 10 pines just happened to be growing in the right spot in the shelter belt in one row of pines. Did I say pines? The walnuts growing between the pines are doing very well and are showing considerable promise, which leads to my next question. How do I thin 15-year-old pines from a row? I guess I have to cut them and drag them out with a winch. But I want to do that because these are very promising young walnut trees. So that'll be the next thing to do.
What size are the pines?
The pine, about like this. Let's say 6 inches at the butt.
And you
I
just,
think with-
what do you want to do with them?
Well, I can't think of anything that they'd be of any use for, but I do need to get more sunlight to the walnuts, I think. So I'll just cut them and scrap them, I guess.
Does
The,
anybody else have ideas?
Well, I called the guy who has trimmed pine branches from my other stands of pine. He sells it in Toronto, takes truckloads of pine boughs to Toronto just before Christmas. And he said he'd be happy to do it next year. He'd come and he would take the branches away, and then it's a simple matter to knock the poles down and create some space that way.
There's a few more people that just signed on, and I wonder if they have any questions, and perhaps it's things we've already talked about, but Felix, for example, hello, and I'm wondering if you guys have any, if you or anyone else have any other questions about black walnuts and growing black walnuts, or squirrels, working with squirrels to plant black walnuts.
Another possible topic is the improvement cut, getting rid of the diseased beech. This is a major issue in our area. One other thing I should mention, for people who are around Guelph, having a stand of black walnuts is no big deal. But in this area, it was practically unheard of because we're outside the normal range of the walnut tree, which was interesting. Anyway, sorry, carry on.
Yeah, so describe the improvement cuts to us.
I beg your pardon?
You could, if you'd like, you could talk
describe
about
it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
describe kind of what that is, and why it's of interest to people that have woodlots.
Well, it's part of the managed forest plan, is that from time to time, an improvement cut is necessary to get rid of the old overaged trees. Now, the oddball thing about this was that they went into our sugar bush, which had all the characteristics of an old growth forest. It had never been grazed. The trees were large. There were a fair number of dead ones. And the Stewardship Council and Martin convinced me that for the good of the woodlot, it should be managed into something which produces an optimum amount of wood. And so I guess it went from an old growth forest to a managed industrial forest. It all has to do with the density of the trees and the species. And it certainly cleaned up and didn't damage the canopy. And once the what's the word? The branches rotted away, it was really quite lovely. There were 3 definite layers to the canopy. But then on an 11-year reunion of the Stewardship Council, they turned up in the woodlot to take a look around. And that was when Martin Straight pointed out to me that all of my beech are going to die because they all have this disease, and you better get the things cut and get them out of there. Now that happened to correspond to the 12-year improvement cut, which was scheduled. And so the old maples came down, and the beech a lot of them came out and they became firewood. The Greg Beach and Brian Raisin, I don't know if I got lucky or I had good management, but they were great guys. And the whole thing worked really well.
And did you notice any difference in biodiversity in terms of bird presence or other animals before and after those cuts? So were there any sacrifices in biodiversity, do you think?
Well, the obvious thing was the new nest for the red-tailed hawks, but there have always been red-tailed hawk nests around. And when the leaves got off, I think I counted another 7 or 8 stick nests in a 10-acre plot where the heaviest of the cutting was, besides the new red-tail nest. Turkeys wander in for the winter and wander into our garden. Rough grouse don't seem to be able to handle the situation anymore. I don't know if it's a natural dieback of them. They're one of my favorite birds, but I think I only saw one this year. The other birds, the wool-affiliated woodpeckers, are having a whale of a time. And there are a lot of little birds that I don't know about.
Did what was it that kind of convinced you to do the improvement cut? Because I think there are a lot of people, members, non-members that I've talked to that are hesitant to make any kind of cut like that, especially to an older growth forest. And so what was it that encouraged you to do that, maybe despite?
I think it was the impetus of the plowing match. There was a committee working here. They had established a certain amount of credibility. They put their money where their mouth was and put an all-season road into the woodlot, which we were going to be able to use for a long time. So they had some credibility and they suggested this, and I didn't know any differently. So I went with the best advice I had. And it has been, by all standards, pretty good. The previous conservation display that I went to see in Peterborough the previous year, I think they had 250 people visit the conservation display in the woodlot. We had 2,500 in a 4-day period take tours through the woodlot. We had 4 wagons set up to haul people around with tractors, with Stewardship Council members doing their pitch. Well, that wasn't working. So they still ran the 4 wagons, but the Stewardship Council members were also walking groups of people around because they couldn't keep up with them with the wagons. Anyway, if it was a runaway success, the whole thing, but the local Stewardship Council had put an enormous amount of work into it, and they were quite proud of it.
Rod, what kind of things were you showing in your woodlot at the plowing match?
Well, first trip through, I was on the first wagon going through, and there are some tall maples and various other species. But a 10-year-old kid looked up on a maple tree and said, "Look at the bees." There was about a 1-inch diameter hole in a maple, and there were honeybees flying in and out of the thing.
Cool.
I walked the National Nut Growers Association annual meeting attendees, 75 of them, the day before the plowing match. I walked them around the woodlot, and we came out into the same cathedral-like section of the trail, and it was positively full of monarch butterflies. And they were really tickled by all of these monarch butterflies everywhere. So they like that a lot. It is maple cherry beach stand of, and that's basically what they saw. Then when they came out of the wood lot, they went into a field where I had planted black walnuts, and they'd imported some 5-year-old walnuts that they had to get out of Brockville. They lasted a year or two and then died, but the roots kept growing, and that's what we knew would happen. And there was a stand of butternut there as well. Then they looped back through. So it was a wagon ride for about a mile. Yeah. And that was the tour. Then there was a display on the side hill outside, inside a tent, for the other things that the conservation group were doing. There were about 400 acres of tents just outside the woodlot. And I think the reason we had so many people into the woodlot was because they had a raptor display. This group had, golden eagles trained and flying around to their handlers, and it was a huge success. And I think a lot of people just gravitated into the woodlot. Now, have I lost the track of this? Did I answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's very cool. Yeah, I have yet to go to an international plowing match, and there was supposed to be one this past year, but because of COVID, it wasn't here, and it would have been just outside my door. But we'll plan for next year. It's supposed to be in Kempville, so if we can go in person, that'll be great. I know we have.
There are some fine people in Kempville.
Yeah,
that's where a lot of the brains of everything that's happened on the woodlot is from people in Kempville.
Felix asked a question. He asked if you or anyone else had ever tried tapping the walnuts for syrup.
Yes, I did. My neighbor, Lloyd Stone, we were making syrup, and he wanted me to try tapping walnuts. So I tapped 2 trees. I got a little bit of greenish syrup, sap, which I gave to Lloyd, and he boiled it. And he ended up with a little bit of syrup. And I think we agreed it was nothing remarkable. I think a hard maple is hard to beat for sugar content and volume. And I don't think the walnut is going to come anywhere close to it. At the time we were making syrup, and I'd already finished making syrup before the walnuts started to run.
Yeah, they're at different times, right? When do the walnuts start to run?
I don't know. It just didn't. Well, I would have to say that they start to run slightly after the maples finish, which means they're not going to have the weather to run well, because the weather pretty much determines the sap flow. In any case, I didn't see there was any reason to continue to tap walnuts.
Does anybody else have any other questions before I change the subject? No. I was going to ask you about the FSC certification, and because you're one of the few, there are other members that have their forest FSC certified, and it's sort of an up and coming certification. it's been around for quite a while, but it's gaining more traction. And I'd love to ask you why you got involved in FSC certification. Maybe if you could just briefly describe what it is, what it entails, and why you had your forest FSC certified.
I must plead innocence here. It was just one of the things that came with the package in preparation for the plowing match. And so I ended up, without knowing it, getting FSC. I don't do acronyms well at all. So I have a picture of the sign that I had posted outside the woodlot during the plowing match. The sign has since peeled away. I need a new sign, Glenn.
I'll make that. I'm the one making it, so I'll make it for you and make sure you get it. Yeah.
Really?
Yes,
do.
I'll make. Yeah, no problem.
Anyway, it didn't have any significance until I sold the walnut tree and the basswood to a fellow who is making furniture in the Cornwall area, and he's making walnut furniture for high-end clients in Ottawa, and he wants walnut trees. And I was able to convince him that basswood is an excellent secondary wood, available at a fraction of the cost of walnut. Anyway, so I can see that it would be of some advantage to him, I think, but I'm not positive, to be able to say that the lumber that he is using in his projects is sustainable. Now, maybe not. Maybe the people who want to buy high dollar dining room tables would rather think that it's not sustainable. I don't know.
And how much does it cost you something to have it certified? And is there some burden on you, or is it pretty light?
Not that I know.
Okay. So it's not a huge administrative burden or cost in order to.
Well, we did have an audit. Glenn and the other guy from somewhere came through, and we had an audit, and I haven't heard yet how the audit went, but I suspect it went pretty well. They seem to go away happy.
That's good. That's awesome. And I also, and unless anybody has any questions about FSC certification. No. I was going to ask about your butternut plantation and who put that in and why.
Okay, why? Because they had some 3-year-old butternuts in a greenhouse at Kempsville, and they contributed them to the conservation display. So they gave me 100 butternuts. They were nice big trees, and it was really important that they have something big enough that people passing in a wagon behind a tractor could see them. Even though I mowed the grass really short, my little seedling walnuts were not very impressive. And they wanted to have something people could see.
Well, that's a very good return.
Gary Nielsen told me, Gary Nielsen was the first guy who was giving me advice on this. He said, in 15 years, they'll all be dead, but in the meantime, they will have something for them to see.
And are they all dead?
Nope. They aren't. Now, since then, we planted 30 hybrids in a row on the outside of the 5 acres stand of pine and walnut that are growing on the southern part of the drumlin. And they're doing not too badly, and they started to bear. Now, Rose Flugel, the butternut lady, there's Rose's lot in life is to keep track of butternut trees in Ontario. And she came and looked at them and said, yes, they're about ready to start bearing, and they will bear prolifically, and they will produce very good nuts, and they are a threat to the walnut because they're not pure. They're a threat to the butternuts because they're not genetically pure. They're hybrids. They're quite resistant to the blight, but they're not really butternuts. So we'll just have to eat them.
Eat every single one and make sure that they
Well,
don't proliferate.
well, I haven't been able to find any. My granddaughter is really good at spotting them. She can drive by in a utility vehicle and point out the butternuts on the trees when they're growing. But I can't find the things. I think the squirrels get them.
So what are you going to do there then, if you have this mix of hybrid and non-hybrid? Have you decided what the plan is?
I have little enthusiasm about butternuts. They don't make nice trees, and they don't produce really, really nice logs. So I'm really not all that concerned. If anybody wants some hybrid butternuts, come along and help yourself. Incidentally, what I do with most of the walnuts that I gather is I give them to people in 5-gallon pails to take away to plant, because around here, with the ash dying because of the emerald ash borer, it's opening up big gaps on fence rows and in woodlots, and people are starting to think that walnuts are the most likely replacement for the dying ash. All we have to do is teach the squirrels to plant them. No kidding.
Felix, I'm curious if you have any experience with butternuts and maybe what some other values are.
Butternuts, eh?
Yes, butternuts.
I I don't know. I'm actually not. I've really been focusing more on. So like this fall, there was just a ton of walnuts, and I got like a lot of free ones off of Kijiji that people were just giving away.
Mhm.
And I picked up a ton. Like in Lindsay, there's a cemetery that's just loaded with walnuts, and I got a few trailer loads, like a few 100 pounds, and I just dropped them off in the bush. And the squirrels like did their job. They were all gone within a week or two. And yeah, that's sort of my strategy too. Just get the squirrels to plant them, and then when the ash, and there's a lot of ash dying, and they'll sort of, I'm hoping that the walnuts replace the ash. And it'd be nice to get butternuts, but I don't know, they just don't really, it's really costly. You spend like $25 to get a butternut seedling, and I'd rather just plant the walnuts for free,
Yeah. I find the walnut is a much more vital tree. They're not as delicate.
Yeah, they don't have, I think they just seem to have better structure, the ones I see. Like they don't have the V crotches as much, and they don't seem to be as vulnerable to things like an ice storm. But I don't know, that's just things I've noticed.
And now the walnut leaf borer is a threat to walnuts, but the ministry has spent 4 years trying to find one in traps on my walnuts and never did get one. There were lots of butternut leaf borers, and they will bother walnuts, but they're not the ones that carry the 1,000,000 cankers disease, or something like that. That's the thing that's killing the walnuts in the States. So walnuts are generally pretty healthy, and the gypsy moths don't seem to like them all that much if they have anything else they can eat.
Yeah,
And
I haven't really
butternuts are
noticed.
delicious.
So are walnuts.
Yeah, I was gonna, yeah, walnuts are delicious as well. And free by the mother load.
Now, my mentor, Neil Thomas, was determined to make a commercial market for walnuts. But the problem was the last 5% of the shell. Nobody wants to put walnuts into the things that they're cooking if they're going to bite down on pieces of shell. My approach was to grow the things for timber. And that seems to be more viable than trying to harvest the nuts for meat. Although there's a huge market for it.
Yeah, it's very labor
There's
intensive.
there's a guy, I've seen a few videos down in the States where people feed black walnuts through a wood chipper, and then they feed that to the chickens, and the chickens pick out the nut meat. I mean, it's high protein, but I'm not sure. It could be just turning walnuts into eggs instead of trying to eat them.
That's a good idea.
Like in the movies, I think the movie was Sounder, where they the mother wanted to make a chocolate walnut cake. He sent the kids to the woods to shoot a couple of squirrels, and then she took the walnuts out of the stomachs, washed them, and put them into the cake. Which is it's a variation. A squirrel. That's not as bad as it sounds. I was thinking of harvesting the chickens and getting the nuts from the crop. That would be a little strange.
It's like that that coffee that you eat after the animals pooped it out. It's
Right.
a luxurious product.
Well,
Rod, where is your farm?
just south of Portland,
Portland, where's that?
between Kingston and Smith Falls.
Oh, okay.
Okay, well, if it's 8 o'clock, so if there aren't any more questions, I'll just wait a second and see if anyone has any further questions. And if not, I'll be happy to take any questions just by email, and I can pass those off to Rod, and of course you guys will all get this recording, so you don't have to worry if you missed anything. So thanks everybody for coming, and Rod, thanks so much for your time, and we look forward to next month's video. Neil's helped a lot to put that together, and it'll come out, I think, this next week, eh, Neil? Probably.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that one has a large focus on American chestnuts.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So
I would love to get some of them.
yeah, well, yeah, definitely you could reach out to the folks that are going to be in the video.
Unfortunately, Rod, I'm on the Chestnut Council, and we're not allowed to give them away, unfortunately, or sell them. Because they're I guess it's the entire government's protection doesn't allow us to do anything.
Eventually, the baseboards in my house are chestnut.
Wow, cool.
It's kind of a neat wood. I would love to get more. But anyway, I'll look forward to seeing the talk. That should be very interesting.
We just have a little bit of editing to do, and they'll be ready.
It's hard. There's so much good content, right? And we don't want it to be too long. I mean, Rod had more content than you guys saw, and it was all good. we're trying very hard to keep it under 30 minutes, these videos to the digestible, but gosh, there's a lot that can be discussed in each one. So yeah, Neil and I are trying to kind of edit the last couple minutes, and then it'll be sent out hopefully early next week. And
Oh, that's great.
yeah, so thank you everybody so much for coming.
Ask one more walnut question.
Yeah.
Okay. To Rod, is it true that walnuts produce heavily probably every 4th year?
I beg your pardon?
Is it true that walnuts produce heavily every 4th year?
Depends upon the tree. I mentioned in the video that the trick is to get an every year bearer when you're collecting seed. And there are every year bearers in the woodlot. Some of them, I don't know where you got the figure every 4th year. It could very well be accurate. I find about half the trees in my woodlot, I can go to them every year and get nuts. And some of them never bear. Now in the stand that I put, the best bearing stand, they have just started to bear in the last 2 or 3 years. They're 15 years old now. And the odd thing this year was that a couple of the trees that hadn't borne before are producing these lemon-sized walnuts, which are so big that the red squirrels can't carry them.
Wow.
So I'm quite interested in them. They obviously came from a different seed source than the others. Certainly not off the farm. I've sampled them. They're well filled and they taste good. So I'm quite interested to see how they do. But that's all I can tell you about every year bears.
I live in the Niagara area.
Yes.
And we have walnuts around, so that was probably more observation, and I probably heard it on one occasion. So.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Well, you have a lot of walnut trees down there.
Oh yes, yes.
When I drove south of Lake Erie, and I saw the walnut trees down there, they didn't look all that much like Leeds County walnuts. They seemed to be less stocky. The branches seem to be thinner and more flexible.
That's quite possible. Yeah.
The climate up here makes them pretty sturdy, I think. But anyway, and they also have large fruit and all kinds of it falling all over everywhere. Whereas the trees that were growing on our woodlot, on our fence row, had surprisingly small nuts. They were well filled, and they produced about 25% nut meat, but they were small. Now maybe it was to cater to the red squirrel crowd.
That's interesting. All right, guys. Well, thank you for a very informative session, and I really enjoyed this, and I'm looking forward to the one next month. It's definitely one of my favorite parts of what I do is running these sessions. So thanks for making this so enjoyable, and I look forward to seeing you guys next time. And again, if you have any questions, just email me and I'll pass them on to Rod. And if there's something that you didn't catch, hopefully you'll be able to access the recording that I'll send out tomorrow. All right. Have a wonderful evening, everyone. And
Well, thank you for having us, Erica.
Looking forward to next time.
Great session.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Now, how do I do?